Michael, I guess, right?
Correct.
Okay.
You're all set.
Okay. So I think it's fine to let Andrew in as well. I mean, does anybody have any objections?
No.
Okay, so welcome, Andrew.
He's muted.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's 6:32 p.m. Call the meeting to order. The first item is communications with parents, citizens, staff. We obviously don't have a lot of public here. We could have Andrew here. I don't know if you have any interest in making a grand statement, Andrew?
No, I'm here to listen.
Okay, but welcome aboard.
Thank you.
All right, so the first item, I'll ask David to once again just kind of do a quick read of the board norms.
Okay, so we will start and end on time, maximum of 2 hours. We will be prepared for agenda items. The agenda will prioritize the most important issues. We will have time limits on agenda items. All members will have an opportunity to speak if they so choose. We will listen to who is speaking and focus on the issue at hand. We will not micromanage the superintendent.
Okay, great. I guess we typically don't, but I'll just thought I'd throw out, any comments on the agenda or proposed additions to the agenda? Okay, hearing none.
I move the consent agenda.
Thank you. Is there Dick moved? Is there a second?
I will.
Okay, that was Jane. Yep. Or who? Sorry. No,
Ann.
Cory.
Diane.
Diane. Okay. So the consent agenda is just the minutes of November 16th. If there are no objections to taking on it as consent agenda, then please signify by raising your hand if you approve the consent agenda.
My hand is up.
Dean, yep. Okay, any opposed? Any abstentions? That's unanimous. So we move into governance. Yeah, please.
I move the adoption of the prevention of sexual harassment as prohibited by Title IX policy, which we previously discussed. Don't have much option to adopt it.
Yes, it is a mandatory policy. We did approve it previously, so now it's the adoption point. So Dick has moved. Do we have a second?
Second.
Well, Dean, I'll give that to Dean this time. Okay. So Dean gets the second. Any discussion on that? Hearing none. All in favor of approving? Dean, speak up, and the rest of you raise your hands.
Aye.
Yep.
Okay, that appears to be unanimous as well. Okay, so we now move into the meat of the meeting here and hand it over to Sue for the discussion on the, first I want to actually mention the plan. The plan here is this is the first draft of the BRSU general budget. The plan, the intent is to discuss this tonight, have comments, input, etc. And in our next meeting, we'll have then, any updates to the general budget, and we'll have the SPED budget at that point, and we'll actually be looking at approving both of those budgets in our next meeting. So that, even though we'll see the SPED budget just for the first time, as we've passed, we don't a whole way on the SPED in any case. So the general budget being a major major item. You'll have a chance to see it tonight, comment, and then have a further discussion in our next meeting. Does that sound good to everybody? Deb?
Is the next meeting in January? or is
No, we need to schedule it for December.
Okay,
Nick?
By tradition, since the awful lot of the SPED budget is mandated by both the state and the feds, we don't usually spend a great deal of time because most of it is not discretionary.
Right. But at the same time, I think it's incumbent upon all of us to understand, it's again, we're not trying to, hey, Michael,
Hi all.
we're not trying to, micromanage it or say, gee, move this from that line to that line. But at the same time, I think it's important that we all have a decent understanding of where the money is going. So, hopefully we'll be there for the next meeting. So I'll open it up to Sue to run us through the draft general budget.
Sure. So you can see we've got a bit of an increase, and I've sort of revamped how I'm sharing this summary page with you to try to make it a little easier to read what expenditures are included in the assessment and what isn't, because we do have quite a bit of cost in there that we want to share with you, our grants and our billings back to the districts for direct services, but they have nothing to do with the assessment. So I pulled everything sort of out so you'd be able to see what that percentage increase is on its own. So I hope that's helpful. As I shared in our little handout that Celeste sent out earlier for me, we have a couple of items in the student staff support section that are the bulk of the increases, or about a little more than a third of the increases. So some of that we talked about at the last meeting. We talked about the fact that we've added iReady it's the student assessed software, correct, Andy?
mhm.
It's part of it is assessment.
And she's frozen on me. And we've added also Google. There's something called, where's my Google Enterprise, and then are going to cost extra.
Yeah,
Sue,
so
I
you're
think
kind of
it-
breaking up.
Right, I think you're frozen a little bit. Or frozen, period.
Yeah,
Very-
you might turn the video off. Sometimes that helps. Is
Yeah.
Sue still?
She's frozen.
Yeah.
Her video's gone, so
She'll come back.
Yeah. Let's give her a minute.
can we, which page on the proposed budget is?
Yeah, I think it's packet page 24 that she's referencing. I was going to confirm that as well.
Yeah.
She's talking about the student staff support increases.
Mhm.
So she was referencing iReady, which is both a personalized, provides both assessment data for the class and for individual students, progress monitoring data on students' individual work, and a personalized path of instruction and related to reading and math. So it's an increase for sure, but what it provides is a bunch of things that we had from other places that weren't particularly well integrated.
Yeah, so
And the other-
that's
so
the
that's
general numbers on 24 and the breakout on 26.
Right.
yeah, and she's got the explanation on the additional sheet. I think it was Google Enterprise that she's talking about, which is a suite of Google related supports and add-ons that will help facilitate the experience for teachers and students. And she probably has a little bit more information on that than I do. I don't want to give you incorrect
I
details.
think she's back.
I'm back. I'm sorry. This is the second time I've gone out in the meeting, so I apologize if it happens again. I'm not sure what's going on with my internet. I'll just keep going and hope that it sticks with me. So yeah, the seesaw is we need to buy additional licenses. We're using it right now, but Skylar said we need additional licenses. We don't have enough for next year. We're going to need more. So he gave me another number that's added on to that.
One of the things that becomes particularly important, which you explained to the Taconic and Green and probably the other boards, was that this is in large measure a response to better data collection and better teaching, motivated in part by the COVID requirements of both distance learning and you think that it's going to be a significant, as does Skylar, significant improvement in helping the system respond on an individual basis. And so therefore, as you described it to the Taconic and Green, you said, Randy, that you really think that this is a significant improvement in helping our kids to be well monitored and giving them appropriate academic advice, and that you expect this to be a program that sticks around for a while. There are some initial costs.
Is that
Correct.
largely iReady though?
That's iReady that Dick is
Right.
referencing. Yep. And Seesaw that Sue was just talking about is a learning management system that we've been using at the elementary level, and offers sort of dynamic interfacing between students and teachers through a learning management system. So it's necessary for what we're doing right now. We don't have a sense at this point of exactly how we intend to use it moving forward. We want to have lessons learned from this year, but our teachers have invested a tremendous amount of time and resources and learning into we're forced into using a learning management system in one way because of the pandemic. When we remove that layer, there still remains a really valuable way to collect student evidence of student work and learning, and it becomes a platform to leverage some of the strongest benefits and outcomes that we could have yielded this year to maintain those moving forward. And without a platform to continue that work, at this point in the year, I feel that it just undermines the incredible work that people have been doing, and it would stall our ability to continue to move forward in whatever direction we choose as we look ahead. So
Now, did we start out with 2 different learning management systems?
we do, and we still have it. So we have Google Classroom. What we have found in talking to teachers and in seeing their work is that Seesaw offers a much more dynamic, interactive, interesting platform. You saw Skylar showing you Seesaw pages that were interactive and dynamic. We gave some examples of that at Taconic and Green. Google Classroom is a much more flat platform, doesn't allow for the opportunities of engagement and feedback and interactivity that exists within Seesaw. So that's why we wanted to make sure that regardless of where we were, we had funding, we had the funding available should we decide that we wanted to offer it for everybody.
Okay.
I have a different question.
Deb, yeah.
Well, I should know this, but what is it on line 11? What is the grants expense? Do you see what it is?
Oh, sure. So we'll get to that at the end of sort of after we finish the general budget discussion, but it's on packet page 30. We have the breakdown starting of all of our grant expenditures. And it's basically that covers our main grant expenditures, our consolidated federal programs, our spending of Medicaid funds, our EPSDT funds, our new CFR and ESSER funds, right? So there's a lot of federal and state money coming at us, and we spend that as well. So it's sort of an in and out on the summary page, but that way you get to see what we're spending the money on.
Okay. Good.
So that's the software. And then the last part of that curriculum support that really is a big bump is the shift of moving the new HHB Restorative Justice Coordinator position from the Taconic and Green budget into the BRSU budget. So that was a new position that we added last year to this year's budget. So the position is new this year. And Randy's determined that position would be better suited to the BRSU budget and shared across all schools. So right now it's just Taconic and Green paying for that position, and the position is just serving Taconic and Green schools. Next year, we're going to spread that out, and the position will serve Medowee as well. So Medowee is going to see the impact of that increase in their assessment. Taconic and Green will have a sort of it's going to be not a complete wash for you. You'll actually save some money because the entire position is coming out of your budget, and only your share of the assessed position will be as part of the BRSU assessment.
Do you have a sort of ballpark idea of, how much of that would be shifted to Medowee?
Yeah, it will be about
80%.
11%. 1,500 approximately. So Medowee pays 13% and change on their assessment right now, I believe, between on the breakout
Right.
between
For the
T&G
overall
and Medowee for the school expenses.
Okay.
I just also want to add that there's two other parts of this particular position that are additional reasons as to why we opted to move it to the BRSU budget. This particular individual is also our Title IX investigator. So that service needs to be afforded to Medowee as well because it's a requirement by the new policy, and is doing crisis planning and crisis planning oversight for us. There's a lot, and so that's already been something that we've already consulted with this individual with for Medowee. So there's just it's really tricky for me to sit in this position and to not be able to offer those services to the Medowee school. And really, they should have, from my perspective, the right to access those services like our other schools, and they should have it. So if it's not him, it should be somebody else anyway. But there's no reason not to.
So that is what makes up the bulk of the student staff support increases. The other big place to focus on is administration. We talked at the last meeting that we were going to be bumping the 0.6 FTE assistant superintendent position, which is not filled this year, but we intend to fill it next year with a 1.0. And Randy's already explained the decision on moving forward with that. You are going to see a decrease in administrative positions on the special ed side. And I'll share a whole breakout with you of staffing like I usually do for the whole SU, so you can sort of see where the ups and downs are. I don't have answers for you as far as savings compared budget to budget this time around, but we'll have that for you hopefully at the next meeting. And the other piece is the human resources director position. So we did have that fully budgeted as 100% FTE for this year. But the position itself, based on who we hired, et cetera, is going to cost a little more in next year's budget. So there is a cost variance there for that one position. We also included the equity audit, $5,000 for an equity audit that we hope to have happen next year. And I noted in my little summary to you guys that I need to move that up to the student staff support because basically that is a expense for the schools. It needs to be assessed only to schools. Win Hall should not share in that assessment. So I haven't done that yet, but I will move those costs up for the next draft.
Was that now in contracted services or?
Correct. That's where it is right now. Yep.
And then equity assessment, Sue, is?
So we've started doing work as a system around equity within the BRSU. So this year, the focus of our work has been implicit bias training and white privilege training for all of our staff to begin to really educate everyone on those two concepts that have the potential to really impact our work as educators. And so as we continue, we're looking at, really long-term sustained work in equity. The next stage that I want to take is to do an audit of our entire system. It's becoming increasingly common for districts to have somebody come in and do a professional analysis of equity in from a variety of different perspectives, and then to offer that to the district for feedback to guide their work. So that's why I've asked for it to be included. I know it's a priority of all districts right now. You've communicated that clearly to me. So I am clearly putting it right in the budget for you to understand that it's a priority for me as well. So that the results of that audit would then help to guide our continued work based on our particular needs as a system.
Who does that kind of work?
Yeah, so within the state, there are a number of different people and organizations who can do it. I haven't landed on who I want to use. There's pros and cons, to different people and different experiences, but we have some experts in the state who've been doing equity audits in different systems. We could also go out of the state, but I probably am inclined to choose somebody who's been recommended within the state of Vermont.
Great.
So that sort of takes up the bulk of the big changes under the expenditures for assessment section, okay? Moving on to I'm gonna skip over sort of the district shared services and transportation because there really isn't any changes there. That is simply the cost of the teachers that we bill back to districts that are shared among districts and they're employed at the BRSU. There are changes in that simply because of change in staffing. There's no FTE changes there. So nothing really to discuss on that line item. And transportation is the same contracts, and change in cost is just due to the change in the contract price for that we negotiated for the next 3 years. So on the grants, the big change on the grants obviously is our addition of CRF for this year and ESSER for this year and moving forward. I will tell you that I am still. We are still sort of in limbo land on CRF. Again, the agency is not communicating well with us on their expectations. We do have a grant award, so we've received that. We've been told that we can amend and move things around as much as we need to, but of course we're running out of time now. It's December 7th and the grant is up December 31st. We would have to have our amendment done prior to that. So that's work that we have to do. We absolutely have to do it in our office to make sure that we can get reimbursed for all of the money that we have spent so far this year. And when I have that finalized, I'll share that out with you guys, and I won't wait for a board meeting. As soon as we know what the numbers are going to look like and where we landed, we'll share that out with everybody.
Those are all funds that had to have been expended by 12/31, right?
Correct. So, what we have been putting in orders to make sure we're fully stocked for PPE for the year. And, because we basically could draw down as much of this money as we needed. So, Greg is doing his best to try to get our HVAC projects as complete as possible by December 31, so we can draw our Efficiency Vermont grant money down. So we're all sort of collectively working to try to draw as much money as we can to cover all of those additional costs. Now, as far as ESSER goes, we have a limited amount of money for ESSER, but we have a long period of time to spend it. And we will be sharing some of those grant funds with independent schools. We're going to finish that up this week. They're going to give us their data. We'll be able to determine what their equitable share of those funds are. And we'll pull that out of what we have to spend for a budget. We'll submit an application. And we're not planning on spending this money on a lot of different things. So right now, the intention is to continue to employ our additional school nurse that we hired for Sunderland so that we could have a nurse in every school building. Randy is planning on hiring a social worker and an executive functioning coach. And those positions, I believe, will be able to fund all of that with the ESSER funds. Maybe we'll be short $10,000, $20,000, $25,000. It's hard to know, not knowing how much salaries and benefits will be for those positions. But we also think that we'll be able to make up the difference in our CFP monies, because some of this work actually would qualify for spending under the Consolidated Federal Grant. So we hope to cover all this through grants and not have any of it in the general fund.
So I want to just jump in just for 1 second. Dick, can I just say something quickly about that? Or do you want to jump in?
I have a observation. I love acronyms, but for those of us who don't deal with these acronyms every day, it might be useful every once in a while to say what they are.
I try to remember that. I do. CFP is Consolidated Federal Programs. That's our Title I, II, and IV grant. So that's our federal grant that we get every single year. The CRF is the coronavirus. Relief. I always want to.
Relief funds.
Is it relief? Because there's, for some reason, I'm always hesitant to use that word, relief funds. And ESSER is, Randy, you're going to have to help me with that one. No?
I don't remember ESSER.
It was in the little note, I think, that.
It's emergency, like elementary emergency.
It's elementary, secondary, something. I'll get it to you, Dick.
Emergency, yeah.
I'll look it up.
One thing with the ESSER, though, that I'm not totally clear on is the repeatability of that funding source.
Yes. Elementary and secondary school emergency relief fund. And there's no repeatability, but since it's a federal fund, we get a long period of time to spend it. So what happens is we get a big chunk of money awarded to us, and then we can draw it down over a certain period of time. And it expires in September of 22 because that's the end of the federal fiscal year. In our
So that-
CFP, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I just wondered, you have to have all of that money, I would assume, spent by that point in time so that you can recoup the grant money.
Correct, correct. But we have a long period of time to do it. So if for some reason, say we couldn't hire positions next year like we had intended to, and we were postponing it, or we decide to amend the grant then and we could spend it on something else. So we have some leeway there.
Did
So,
Randy get shut out before?
Yeah, no, that's okay. I think it's important for me to connect a couple dots for you. To Conic and Green, when we met last week, we had a conversation about thinking about next year and thinking about the needs of our students when they return, and recognizing and identifying that it's very likely that we are going to face both kids that have some adjustment, mental health challenges, readjusting to school. Basically, we have a lot of students who are not going to have been in school 5 days a week, 6.5 hours a day for a very long time, and that there will likely be challenges with attention, with engaging, with work completion, and just a number of kind of school related behaviors that I am anticipating we're going to see challenges with. So I mentioned at the meeting last week that I had begun to start to really think through this. So the two positions, and executive functioning coach is literally a placeholder name because I have not had the time to think through a better name. But if people know what executive functioning skills are, it's all like frontal lobe stuff. It's attention, it's
We
concentration,
use one of those.
initiation. It's like initiation, work completion, turning it in types of behavior. So I put this in here with the intent of saying, I'd like to, as we look ahead, how can we be as proactive as we can be? If we can hire somebody to help teachers with understanding what some of their students might be facing and coaching them through strategies and supports to put in their classrooms that maybe they haven't had to do the way that they may have to do it. Somebody to support parents in understanding how to support their kids in the adjustments being back, and potentially work with kids. So I don't have it all fleshed out. Thankfully, I have a whole lot more time to kind of work through this and to help work with people here to figure it out. But that's what that position is. The social worker is also designed for the same thing. Having a SU level social worker to support everyone in the transition back to school, to help identify what are some of our system-wide needs. Obviously, a social worker isn't going to, for the system, is not going to be able to provide necessarily the level of individual support, but if we can create an umbrella of supports that we can then use to trickle down to the building level, that's really what I'm looking for. So I just wanted to connect with those of you who are at that meeting, and Meadowy folks, you'll hear me talk about this when we meet next week, but these were included in ESSER as a way for us to try to use the funds in a way to meet the needs of our kids and families and teachers next year.
Okay, and just again, since it's a limited term of funding, is the expectation that this is getting us through the transition back, but it would be a temporary, probably a temporary support for our people?
At this point, that's exactly what I'm thinking. My hope is that putting additional supports in place next year will yield longer term benefits. I would expect that if we were to look at educational literature coming in the spring, it's going to be focusing a lot on the challenges with coming back to school for the 21-22 school year. And so I think it's good to be ahead of the game instead of me sitting here next June thinking, oh my gosh, I haven't even thought of that. And we don't have anything in place. So.
Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about is the assessment page. So you guys are all aware that
What page is that?
that is packet page 34.
34.
you guys are all aware that the legislature took action to limit our ADM decline to no more than whatever your ADM was the prior year, right? So that is the boat that TNG and Medway find themselves in right now. In a look at our preliminary numbers, and I say preliminary only because the state has not provided us any data on what our ADM actually is. So we're going on what we expect it to be based on what we submitted. And it's down in both Medway and TNG's cases. So we allocate our assessment based on our ADM numbers and in different ways, depending upon what the funds are for, right? So we're being equitable about how we're allocating those funds. Something that's happening at the school level is not being charged to Win Hall. Something that is related to, let's say, transportation, with respect to non-contracted services would not be billed to Medway because Medway only deals with contracted services for transportation. So we're taking a look at that when we allocate funds in the assessment. And so next year's, or this year's, I should say, ADM, which is what we're using for next year's assessment, we would expect TNG and Medway to stay whatever their ADM was last year, which are the numbers that you're looking at on this page, but Win Hall's numbers are going up. So we all know that Win Hall saw an influx of students this year. So their ADM has increased and their ADM is up then on the assessment page. And so what that means is that Win Hall is going to see a significant increase in their assessments from the supervisory union because their overall proportion of the whole is going up because their ADM has gone up when TNG and Medway have stayed flat. Okay, so I just want Dean, you to be aware of that, that's an expectation that the assessments are going to be on the higher side simply because your student count is up.
Yes. And the overall assessment is higher this year than it was last year as well, right?
Correct. And so that I have like on page 3 of the handout that I sent to you guys. I sort of broke down basically what we've already talked about. Where does that increase in assessment come from? So the total increase in the assessment is 185,767 right now. That's the projection. And that's the majority of that are all those pieces that we discussed that we've added to the budget. In addition to the only other change really that's out there is that I've increased the amount of surplus that we're projecting to use for next year. So our anticipated surplus is, a nice high number right now, right? We talked about how we landed the year, I want to say around $80,000 higher in surplus than we anticipated. And we're not spending as much money this year as we anticipated. And so we're expecting a surplus of 237. So I'm suggesting we use 100,000 of that to reduce the surplus for next year. So it's one of those things, it's always tough, right? Because if we use a lot of surplus, we have it, we could use more. If we use a lot of surplus, then the following year, we're going to see that big bump in the assessment percentage, right? Because our budgeting costs aren't likely to go down. We're not going to cut a bunch of positions, most likely. So we're still going to have the same amount of money that has to go into the assessment is going to go into it. But now we no longer draw as much from the surplus. And so that percentage increase looks higher. So one of the things I'd like to do at the local level, so typically what we do for you guys is we're just putting that bottom line assessment number into your budgets. And so that's all the taxpayers sort of see when they look at that detail. What I think I'd like to do going forward, I've played with this 2 ways, whether we pull that surplus right out of that assessment number to make it more continuous from year to year, more consistent, more easy to compare from year to year. And we could do one of 2 things. We could put the surplus, the return of surplus, because that's what it is, right? We're returning some money back to the districts that the SU didn't use, that you were previously billed. So we could put that as a revenue line item, but I like it better showing it as a negative number right in with the expenditures and sort of give you a subtotal right on that page instead of doing it in the detail in the back somewhere where people have to go searching for it. Because I know that's one of the questions that always comes up. Why is the BRSU assessment going up this much money? And obviously there's lots of reasons for it. It's hard to go into all of them for one number when that's just one little piece of your budget. So that's what I'm thinking of doing to sort of make it just a little more transparent for people looking at the budget if everybody's comfortable with that.
I'm comfortable as long as you backfill any surplus that was used in previous years.
Absolutely.
So that line item is basically comparable.
Absolutely.
The other item that I would like to see is the remaining surplus that would then travel into the following year.
Yeah, and that is on, that's right now on packet page 25.
Right.
So
One page.
I'm not sure how, packet page 25?
Yeah.
Are you suggesting to show that somehow in the TNG and Meadowy budget presentation stick, or just available for people to see and refer to on the BRSU side of things?
Well, I think it needs to be in both, because if we get into this business of the declining student population,
Mhm.
and the taxes are going to go up,
Mhm.
and we're already told in the legislative session that the projected increase in the homestead is at this point 9 to 10 cents. And people are going to have a huge amount of problem with the fact that if we increase our budget as well, then that whole education cost with equalized pupil and all the rest of it could well be a huge number. And I think that it's important, if not in the frequently asked questions, somewhere that we indicate that we set the money aside last year for good purpose because we knew stuff was going to happen. We want to keep the assessments to a minimum in any given year, and that's the way we use that reserve, and so that the people understand you may pay it last year or the year before, but when we need it, we're going to use it. And I think that's an important area that we need to emphasize repeatedly so that the people understand that they're being taxed for stuff that we really do educationally need, and not just to line our own pockets with our excessive wage.
Does BRSU have a tax stabilization fund like we do with T&G? I mean, to set that up, the voters need to approve it. It needs to be a warrant article, I guess, right? And then they approve funds that move in and out of it.
Well, we don't really need a tax stabilization in BRSU because we don't have a tax rate, right? Our money, we just bill you guys for our services, and then it rolls into your tax rate.
Okay, you're right.
And since the voters don't approve our budget, we don't have to have voter approver to sort of designate, really, that's what it's called. We assign funds for specific purposes, like we do on packet page 25. We have set aside money on an annual basis for equipment and for curriculum. But there's nothing in statute about how to handle surpluses and deficits at the supervisory union level the way there is for districts.
I get it. Thanks.
I'm just merely asking for transparency, so that when the budget or the Meadowy budget come out, all of a sudden you get the assessment in that budget from the BRSU, and it's going to show a percent increase. And the more we can be clear about the fact that we're managing this system for the benefit directly of students and the long-term as well as short-term benefit, the better off I think we are in appealing to the voters.
Okay, good point. Thank you, Dick.
Hey, Sue, I just wanted to make sure I understood so you're really talking about in the summary pages, including the assessment amount, the reserve used to reduce the assessment and the net.
Well, I was thinking in the detail. So where we have not the real nitty gritty detail, because those pages you guys see, but we don't tend to publish those in the town report or the annual report. I was thinking of, in our line item detail, right, where we actually go through each section and you see there's one line for supervisory union. And so I'm suggesting
the summary page would continue to just have the net figure.
I think so, unless you would prefer me to break it out there too, I certainly can.
I was just thinking that, from the standpoint of transparency and making it clear, it might be.
Okay.
It's something to think about. You kind of look at it either way.
I think we have room for it. The summary page itself is just expenditures. And so I think there's plenty of room for us just to add a few lines. It's not going to muck anything up for people because there'll be a subtotal there. So I think it's fine. I think you're right. It would be very clear.
Michael, yeah?
No, I would just echo that sentiment.
Okay.
I think there'll definitely be people in Rupert, given all the shifts of a lot of the financial realities, that are going to want greater granularity
Mhm.
Right.
in terms of those things. And it also sounds, Sue, like it's something that you feel comfortable and confident in terms of articulating.
Yeah. And I think you're right. It's important.
From the bigger budget to the smaller individual district
Yeah.
budget. So
Yeah, absolutely.
Good. Deb, hop in.
Thinking back to all our Act 46 work and about how that one of the goals of Act 46 was to consolidate districts enough that all of that would be in each individual district, which we can't do because we're in a supervisory union, but you see the problem with it over and over again.
Right. So that's the draft. One of the other things I just wanted to mention, that we didn't have special ed ready for you yet this week. And I know, Jim, you mentioned perhaps a December meeting, and we were actually thinking of a January meeting. And my reason for that is twofold. One, because I want to make sure I have enough time to really get special ed ready for you. I don't want to rush and throw something at you that you're just going to have to look at again. And the other reason is that we are still collecting healthcare data, right? So people are still making their final decisions. Stuff is still coming in fast and furious. We don't even, I think, have half of our responses back yet. So we really need that data. Is going to help inform whatever these final budgets that we present to you are, especially in SPED. SPED's a big budget, lots of staff, right? So the longer I can wait for that data to come in to present something to you guys, the better off we'll be.
That's
That
fine.
being
My only concern was how it fits with the
Yeah.
timing of the district.
Sure. I'll
My-
let Randy jump in there.
Yeah, my proposal to you is going to be January 4th. I'm doing it right away on January 4th. And then we have T&G on the 5th. I have Win Hall on the 6th. And then we have Meadowy the following week.
Why don't we take a minute right now if people want to check their schedules for January 4th?
Before we move on too far, I had one Win Hall specific question for Sue.
Yeah, go ahead.
Can you explain it to me, because I'm going to have to explain it to our board at our meeting, how exactly the ADM factors into the overall assessment? Because I'm looking at our percentage of the overall ADM only went up about 2%, but our total assessment amount went up like 25%. So I'm just trying to figure where that increase is coming from for us.
Yeah, so it's in individual sections, right? So it's a percentage of your ADM is not the same thing as a percentage of dollars, right? Because they're two completely different numbers.
Right.
So your I think what would be helpful, Dina, I mean, I can't go through and do the math for you on each section, but I do have a further page that I do with comparisons to show you the individual impact of each section and how much more your share is as compared to last year, and then why.
Yeah,
So it might be
I think
helpful.
I saw that in our board materials for our meeting.
It might be, well, I haven't done it for, I haven't done it yet. I haven't handed it out yet, but I could certainly have it ready for you guys for tomorrow night. And that might help sort of clear up exactly where your increases are coming into play.
It
Right.
most likely has to be admin, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the majority of it, right? So you've got a percentage increase to accounting as well. You're going to have a percentage increase to transportation as well. You've got a percentage increase to the surplus. You get more money back as well, but the majority of it is administration. And it's really just a matter of the percentage increase is the percentage increase of a number itself, right? So you're looking at what is the percentage increase of your assessment going from 96 to 121, and that's 25%. But that's not the same thing as your percentage increase in your ADM numbers, because that's a little different. They're just different numbers.
Right. I understand that. I guess what I'm getting at is, I didn't know how the breakdown happened, so I wasn't comfortable trying to explain it to somebody else. And I feel like maybe that might have to happen at our
Yeah,
meeting.
I hear you. I'll put something together that hopefully will answer the question better for you tomorrow night. That's actually,
Yeah.
that people can actually home in on, okay?
So it's safe to say then that our overall, you know, our assessment percentage is going up dollar wise. And even though our ADM is going up, it's, sorry, I lost my train of thought there for a second, but our ADM numbers are not going to be indicative of our percentage increase in dollar amount, because we're
Right.
talking about an ADM increase that affects a total assessment, and then our share of that total assessment is what's actually going up.
Right. I mean, if you think of it just like in round numbers, if you just take $1 million and you say, well, if your share of that $1 million has increased by 2%, what's 2% of that $1 million? Right. So that's not that you're going to have to pay that $20,000 because that's 2% of that million.
Right.
And,
Understand.
and
Yep.
you've got a 24% increase. I'm using round numbers, but that's sort of
Yep. No, that's a good way to explain it.
kind of what we're looking at, right? So it's just making that connection from step 1 to step 2 to step 3, and I'll try to put something together that really just clearly identifies that for you guys.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm prepared for the 4th of January, if that's others in agreement.
Yeah, it works for me.
I'm good with that.
You're good with that? That was
Yes.
Dean?
Fine.
Yeah, well, maybe is there anybody who it's bad for? I'm not hearing anybody. It sounds like we should wait. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
So what did we just schedule? January 4th is going to be our next meeting, rather than try to do a next meeting in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, so no additional December meeting. January 4th is the next meeting to have the new general budget and the sped budget, both. So we'll set that as the date. So we're get ahead of ourselves here. Okay. Great. So any other questions on the first draft of the budget? As usual, fantastic job, Sue.
Yeah.
Randy, it's not easy, complicated stuff. I think all of our brains are getting more flexible to be able to understand these things too. And appreciate it also that, even though it's not the consolidated yet, the breakdown of, personnel and stuff like that in there too. All right. So the next item we have on the agenda is actually legislative updates. And, for everybody, there's a document included in the board package that was used by the Taconic and Green to highlight, it was actually a fabulous meeting. I missed it, but I watched it on video, and I think it's worth everybody's while to take a look, because it was a really, there ended up, one thing is, with the BRSU overall, we cover actually pieces of 4 counties. So we got a whole lot of legislators who are kind of, technically have a piece of us. And was it 10 or 11 legislators who showed
10.
up? So it was a great, we had
If you
senators,
include Seth Bongart's, it's actually 11.
Right. Sorry.
So the base was all of the legislators got the list of those legislative items of interest. So really wanted to, that was done sort of on behalf of the TNG, but it was also, definitely a BRSU wide, what we expected, is of interest to all of us. And, this grouping here at the BRSU, it's a great opportunity, go through it, take a look at the video. If you have other issues that we think we've missed that we should be, pointing to and focusing on, just, pass them along and we'll make sure that we do that. We've, it's interesting timing because, actually David and I being on the VSBA board, the VSBA board, we have a meeting later this week and they're identifying what all the priorities are for legislative efforts. And I think there's a good syncing between, I think, all of our items are also, included with the VSBA pushing on it. But basically, if that was done sort of, for the benefit of TNG and BRSU, but you guys tell us, especially, Medowee and Winhall, if we miss something that Winhall, you've got very distinctive issues. I think there's a consistency of the issues that are to Medowee and to us, but if we're missing things, bring them up, and maybe discuss at your boards, okay, here's what we've said, and are we missing anything, and bring them forward, and we will, we'll push on those items as well. Did David or anybody else want to say anything about the meeting the other night?
There were issues that were brought up, certainly about equity, certainly about mental health, depression, the poorest and most fragile components of our society that are being very dramatically affected from lots of different areas. Jane and our new doctor board member, Lee, were particularly good about that. And we also got some great comments, astute comments from people about issues of equity, community-based schooling, and got a chance to ask a large number of questions. I think that the fact that we gave them preparation, thanks largely to Jim, who composed most of that, certainly helped facilitate and move that discussion aggressively forward. And Jim, thank you very much for helping us to look remarkably well prepared for the legislators.
I think another thing that was really, in watching the meeting that blew me away was, I'd never thought a whole lot about, okay, having students on the board is a nice thing and all. Boy, it made a difference there. Their input was phenomenal. So, having the idea of, having some students, it's a significant commitment on the part of the students to take part in the board, but they actually, they were impressive.
I agree. I'll jump in and just say quickly for Medowee and Winhall, Taconic and Green decided last spring that they wanted student board members on the TNG board. And so this, in September, we went through a process of having students be able to apply and then interview. And now we have 2 student reps on the Taconic and Green board. So I just wanted to give you some context for those of you who may not know that.
And it's a whole different perspective, and I think it really hit home with the legislators when they heard the students. Now it's a little bit tougher in a K to 6, or K to, we've got BBA students being a part of it. It's hard to go a whole lot younger potentially, but it was impactful.
What I would like to add, sorry.
No, go
What I
ahead.
would like to add is I felt like, I wasn't sure, I felt like there were a number of reasons why it came together so nicely. And I think Jim's notes focused us, and that was really helpful. But I also think we observed at the very beginning the benefit of having good, solid leadership from the state level that was helping us with COVID and helping us with other things, from our superintendent. we have good solid leadership, and and then we had multiple constituents. So for whatever reason, all the different different legislators, instead of trying to one up one another, they were talking about ways they could work together to help us do a better job and get the things we need. So it became a concerted, concentrated effort to achieve a common goal, which is the benefit of our students and ultimately of our community. So I was really kind of left speechless. It was a really good example of good leadership, if nothing else.
I was impressed, we learned a lot from them, but I was impressed to see that they said that they had learned a lot from us. I mean, it was a good example of representative government. I mean, we spoke to our legislators and they listened. It was good back and forth.
I'll add to that I was on a meeting this morning with our regional superintendents and legislators again. And there were quite a few legislators who were on with us last week who were also there this morning. And they were bringing in comments from you, from the students, bringing that information into this meeting as well. So I think you are spot on that they were really listening. I mean, I was surprised and really, actually, it was a really positive moment to hear them kind of referencing, oh, well, the student said this, or when we were meeting up with Randy's district, they commented about this. And it was just you could tell that they really had listened, which was a terrific moment to be a part of that.
So that, we're basically, again, we've got with David and I, with the VSBA, we also have a good to kind of continue to push our, major issues and get support from, of all people, Sue Siglowski, helping us to push that at the state level. So, honestly, it's, if things come to mind, or, have a legislative discussion during your board meeting as to, if you show them this note and say, okay, are there other things that we should be focusing on? And if they come up, bring them right back. We'll toss them right into the mix. Okay. So any other, that was kind of just an update, but any other questions or thoughts or no? Okay, so we're moving nicely through. We have incidental information, which I'm never sure what it means.
Yeah, I don't think we have anything specific to add. I think we've touched on the things that you just did, I think, a pretty comprehensive job of covering where we are. As we're working through this month, we've got meetings over the next couple of weeks with all of you to present draft budgets, and then hoping to get things squared away the first part of January. The last thing I'll sort of comment on is that we are looking at, there's work that's going to be happening regarding sort of the voting process and town meetings and school district meetings. The legislature is working on that right now. So it is likely that we will have some you'll hear me bringing to board meetings maybe this month, but likely they will all come the beginning of January, votes for you around how to approach the school district meeting and election of certain positions, and navigating the process of the switch to Australian ballot for things that need to be. And it's going to be a lot in a short period of time for all March elections.
Yeah, the VSBA is trying to stay on top of that as well, and we'll be sending communications out, directly to board members on anything they find, because they know it is going to put a lot of districts in a very awkward position. So trying to get the best answers we can as soon as we can. Michael.
I just wonder if there's any kind of concrete anticipation of these votes having to take place virtually, or is there any sort of discussion about the the nuts and bolts of those meetings at this point, or is it just too early on to know?
The recommendations that they're talking about at this point is not to have in-person on the floor meetings, because if you do, you have to maintain all of the health and safety guidelines, which the recommendation is that that's incredibly difficult, if not impossible to do. And that people who are used to having floor votes would move to Australian ballot. And that if you do that, then you need to have an informational session. So all of that is there is already recommendations are out through VSBA on that, but there are many, many more details related to process and procedure that haven't even been touched on yet. But our understanding is that there are a group of legislators working on this now. And the hope is to, am I correct that you all heard this? Hope is to push this all through the first week in January in its entirety, so that by the end of that week, they've got a plan to roll out to districts across the state.
Right. They started off talking about, trying to have answers the second week of the legislative session. And then another legislator said, we're trying to get it first week, that it really, because it's tough. I think, one of the things that, I've heard through, multiple discussions is, a lot of people might think that doing some sort of hybrid, in person and Zoom, but that hasn't worked out well for most people who've tried to do that. I haven't seen one of those meetings, so I don't know, what the reality is, but it sounds like it's a little more complicated than one might expect. So it's, but that's,
Dawn,
Randy, I'm just curious, Randy, are we in a good position for boards to react as that information comes out,
Well, it depends on when it is. So we're going to keep a close eye on it. Certainly one of the things that I is on a little bit of a monkey on my back right now is this idea that if we're having meetings January 4th, 5th, and 6th, that will be too early for this information. I'll know more, I think, over the next few weeks about where we're going. We may end up having to have additional meetings in order to just discuss this very topic. But at this point, we just don't have enough information to go on. But I'm prepared. I'm preparing. I guess I should say I'm really not prepared, but I am preparing for the fact that there may be many board meetings in January because of all these details.
Well, we've proven with our meetings that you can actually have a 15-minute board meeting, so.
Yeah. I guess to that point, you may want to also be preparing for the same thing.
Randy, can you say one word on the status of our schools and in-person learning? Some schools are announcing that they're going back next Monday.
Well,
where are you?
So for all of our, for 5 of our schools, we're back to capacity as much as we can be at this point. So we have a couple of, within the 5 schools that I'm referencing, there are a couple of places where the number of students and the square footage, the ability to maintain health and safety, like social distancing, isn't possible. Too many kids in a space that they can't make that work right now. They're still trying to look at other options, but with the exception of that, 5 of our schools are back. Floodbrook has taken a slower approach, and they will be back 4 days a week after after December holidays. So we're in good shape across across our entire system. I think that we're back.
But is Floodbrook going back to some degree next week?
Yeah, they're back this week.
Or this week, right?
So Floodbrook was out last week because of we had some certainly operational staffing concerns, and I had shared that we would not open up. I've shared that with all of you if I felt like we couldn't safely do so. And that was the case, but we're back open today. So very happy to be able to share that.
Great.
And we've had 2 positive cases in the last 3.5 months. Both were isolated. Staff, leaders, nurses did a terrific job with navigating all of that. And we're really pleased that there was no spread and no additional positive cases in either of the schools. I will say to you that just I think for your information as a board, the shift to putting a significant amount of the responsibility for contact tracing on schools is a lot. You know, I actually shared that this morning with the legislators. Yeah, you know, I'm one of the few people I think who has the experience of a early positive case, and then another one that we just had last week, and the process were radically different because of the shift in responsibility from the Department of Health to school districts. So I just think it's important to recognize that. Jane.
I know that on the governor's report on Friday, that he mentioned how, I guess that there were some persons on various school boards in the state that it came up as a question if they can work as a substitute teacher during this time, and that process would involve a waiver. I'm just wondering, I'm thinking outside the box here, so I haven't thought about what the liabilities are, but on something like what you're just talking about, Randy, is that the kind of thing that maybe if there were a board member that's an appropriate way to help out, you know, doing some sort of volunteer work in that way, that capacity?
You know, that's an interesting question. I'd like to think a little bit more about it. My initial thought is that even if we take the experience of the positive case at Meadowy, we connected with the local Department of Health office. We met with their team. They sent us template letters. And so we had the information to contact trace, and you know, I'll think more about it. What we noticed there was this element of personal connection, for lack of a better word. You know, the principal and the nurse knew the families and knew the people. And so when you're not a Department of Health employee and you're calling those families, that personal connection went a long way. So I think the experience for the families and for the employees was personal, and from my seat, it was incredibly helpful. I didn't do any contact tracing for them, primarily because of the fact that they wanted to really walk through that with their people. Is it more time consuming? Yes. You know, and so if we were to remove it a little bit and step back and have, say, you, if you were interested, or me, step in more, what does that do? Does it matter? Does it not? I'm not really sure. You know, I think there are a lot of opportunities to reflect and consider and do things differently, but it's a good question. I'll think more about it. But it was a lot different.
Okay. So moving on.
We should give our newspaper people an opportunity to, while we're still assembled, ask us questions if there's a need for clarification.
Well, we got the communications, you know, the public comment coming up in a sec. So I just first on the reflection on norms, I'd just ask anybody, you know, to just speak up if you've got an issue with how we, you know, how consistent we were with the, you know, meeting our norms. Feel free to speak up. If there's nobody, we'll assume that we did okay. We certainly did okay time-wise. And so that'll open it up to communications, you know, with outsiders. So that is, you know, public comment, which I say Darren's on. It looks like Andrew is not on anymore. So we are open to questions, comments, thoughts. Darren?
Thank you, Mr. Dell, for recognizing the paper. I appreciate that. But no, really, I've already sent an email to Sue Sorry, Sue, but obviously have some questions about the budget. And, but no, nothing else at this time. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Great.
Celeste, do we have anybody on YouTube interested in questions,
No.
comments? Okay.
Okay, so we've already set our next meeting date at January 4th, 6:30 PM.
Move for adjournment.
Is there a second?
I will.
Okay.
Everybody's raising their hands.
I'll give that to Corey. Yeah, okay. All right, so all in favor, please say aye. All right.
Aye.
Great. Any opposed? I don't think so. Okay. So thanks, everybody.
Thank
Good
you all.
meeting.